an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 4, Episode 14. I'm finding my bliss. In this episode, I have never been so unexpectedly pleased and surprised by the direction a show decided to go. I truly didn't see this coming at all. At all. And it was everything I needed personally. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Megan for commissioning this episode. So, what I mean is, and I'm sure that those of you who have been following along probably already know, but y'all are aware that I have had a very love-hate on-off relationship with musical theater myself over my life, and I didn't expect, after showing Rebecca so fucking on it all the time whenever musical theater is brought up, to have to step back and be like, oh no, I don't know, I forgot this is what it is like. This is not good, because that is just so my experience, and it's been the one thing with her consistently that I have just been like, I just don't get it. Like, I know that Rebecca, people like her exist, and I always had a hard time because I didn't necessarily have access to a lot of musical theater the way that my peers did, so they would quote shows or sing songs from shows that I had never even heard of, never mind gotten the opportunity to, like, see, you know. So to a degree, I have always just sort of felt like maybe I haven't heard the right songs from certain shows because I haven't gotten a chance to see the whole production. And there were times where I felt like perhaps I should go out and explore more and give it a chance. And I would inevitably come up against like 2 or 3 in a row I really was unimpressed with, despite them being talked up by friends. And I often got the impression that the friends who had talked it up hadn't seen it in a while, and were a little bit like, okay, but like, it is good though. I mean, for its time, it was always like couched in this sort of language, and I just needed that acknowledged, man. You know, like, I am all about the concept of musical theater, and this show is a really good example of it being done well. There are some that I love, and I'm really excited about the fact that they're going to be reviving West Side Story, personally. I know a lot of people are like, well, why do we need that? And I'm like, maybe because the actors in the original were painted orange. I don't know. But it's just always been really hard for me to connect to certain things. And even when I was performing in them, you guys, one of the biggest roles I played 2 like major roles in high school. One was Meg Brocky, I think was her last name, from Brigadoon. And her humorous song is basically a massive like stereotype about the Scots getting drunk and violent at a wedding. And then the other one was South Pacific, in which I played Bloody Mary. And I don't know if you're familiar. If you're not, the whole plot, and I mean it, the whole plot of South Pacific is that a white woman falls in love with a Frenchman living on the islands, and finds out that he has mixed race children And it causes her to reconsider her entire relationship with him and whether she should even marry him. That's the plot. And even in high school, I was like, this is really, wow. It's the sort of thing I have to assume is either updated when it's performed now, or it's not performed at all. If it is performed as written, I have no idea how people get through it. I really don't. And the character that I played was Bloody Mary, who is like a broken English island stereotype who sells shrunken heads and is generally just massively racist and really upsetting. So, yeah. Yeah, it's a thing. It's such a thing. So, I'm just so relieved and pleased at the way this acknowledged all of that. Rebecca has been so into she's been into mentions and references to musical theater. We've seen flashbacks in which she is involved in musical theater and is very into it. And her experience of returning to it and suddenly realizing, like, this doesn't work anymore, actually, is such a reality. You know, I think that this is true of a lot of us as adults when we decide to, like, return to something that we loved as children. And it can be a little bit upsetting. Like, you almost wish you hadn't, even though it was something that gave you such joy and the concept of going back to it gives you such joy. But it can be sort of like, oh, no, it's sort of ruined now. I wish I didn't know. You know what I mean? So that's the first reason why I really liked this episode. But the second reason is because Rebecca's journey towards finding what she wants to do with her life isn't a straight line. And I should have known the show wouldn't make it that easy. I thought what they were going to do initially was have it be that Rebecca isn't as good at musical theater as she thought she was. And that is one of those things where it's simultaneously, there's truth to it that happens. You know, you get very passionate about something and realize, oh, I'm not super at this though. But also, it would have felt a little bit discouraging, like message-wise, basically saying, like, if you're not great at something, don't go for it. And it's community theater. She's not out here trying to make a living on it, evidently, like so far. So just doing it because she loves it is fine. And I was sort of under the impression last episode, and I think I said, is she going to try and do this professionally? It really is revealing that I sort of went there. Because capitalism, did you guys hear the difference? My air conditioning just turned off. There's a background hum to a lot of my recordings, and it's either the heat or the air conditioning. The thing about capitalism that has sort of screwed us is we have been, in many ways, due to a stagnant, like, economy and wages, we have been forced to hustleify all of our interests and hobbies and passions. So it's worked out for me because I got lucky. Let's be honest, like, in a lot of ways, I got really lucky. And I had a lot of privileges to try and see where it went. But there are a lot of people who have hobbies and interests that they can't commodify effectively. For example, knitting and crocheting. The materials to knit are a lot more expensive than people think, and the amount of time sunk into a project is astronomical. So if you were to buy a blanket made by somebody who is actually charging like correctly for the materials and time invested in making a blanket, you're looking at like $300, $400 realistically. Most people are not going to successfully sell a $400 crocheted blanket. So it remains a passion that they do because they love it. But we don't take it as seriously when people do it for fun. We don't respect it when people aren't able to make money off it. And we feel that someone being willing to pay gives it an air of legitimacy. It's just such a bummer. And I feel really bad because like I did that last episode and I was like, well, she's trying to like pursue her passion, but how is she going to be able to like make it in a professional capacity? The answer is she's not trying to. Your bliss and your job don't have to be the same thing. For a lot of people, they're not. And it would be a great world if it could be that way for everyone. In some ways, though, there's a blessing there. Because I have gone the way of trying to make different things that I loved to do my job, like baking. And I'll tell you, it sort of ruined baking for me for a while. And that can happen when you do try too hard to commodify something. It sucks the joy and fun out of it. That's part of why I've pulled back a little bit on what I'm doing for Unspoiled, because I was so exhausted. And I know it's some of you, I can hear you laughing, pulled back like you're doing. Listen, I have though. I have really. But there is, for some people, they don't want it to be what they do for a living. They want it to be what they do to blow off steam, to relax, to just kind of disengage from the world for a little while. And I feel very called out at the revelation that I was doing that to her myself and just assuming that she meant, oh, this is going to be a major career change. I think that I did that because they were talking about her passion and her dream in respect to Rebetzels, which is how she's making a living. But nevertheless, she can do this and Rebetzels. It's obvious, like, she's got a very good situation going, honestly, right now, where Rebetzels, I am assuming, is a place that closes at like 4:00, because it's in an office building. So she's got an ideal situation for being able to participate in community theater stuff without her schedule interfering. If she was a lawyer still, I don't think she'd be able to pull this off. There's just not time. I tried to do community theater when I think I was like 20. And I was working full time as a hostess at this restaurant. And I couldn't make it to rehearsals. Like, they wound up telling me that there were going to be more rehearsals basically than they had disclosed when I auditioned. And I couldn't make that work. It was just, I had a job and the community theater was like a 40-minute drive away. And I will never forget the look that I got from both the director and her assistant. They were incredibly it felt really like what was happening was they were looking at me, a 20-year-old, who was saying, I'm sorry, I have to work, wondering what the hell I did for work that was so important that I couldn't come to this. Like, what bullshit job does a 20-year-old have? And, just again, I wasn't living with my parents, which everybody that I was like in the production with were either teachers or students, or they lived with their parents. And so they had the ability to not work or have part-time jobs instead. So Rebecca's in a really good situation if this is what she wants to pursue as a hobby. Also, I really appreciate the fact that, as I said, I was worried that it was going to be, Rebecca turns out to not be as good as she thought she would be. But instead, Rebecca is like, in the context of the show, she isn't a great singer. She's fine. But she's aware of it, and when Josh makes a comment about it, she isn't even offended by it, which I was really like, that was so refreshing. It's very difficult when you are passionate about something, but you're not amazing, to hear somebody say that, you know, maybe you're not the most amazing singer in the world, but that's okay. Most people, they wouldn't appreciate that. And I'm not saying that she, like, loved hearing it, but she isn't defensive about it the way that I thought she would be. I expected her to react with anger to that. And instead, she's realistic about her abilities. And when the director tells her singing 0, but commitment 10 out of 10, Rebecca is, like, excited and pleased. Again, she doesn't take offense to it. She's just she's right there with the director. Like, yeah, that's what I bring to the table. I am committed to this. So I really liked that instead it's her realizing that maybe this exact thing isn't the thing. I'm in the neighborhood. This is generally, like, in the vein of what I'm looking for. But it's not quite right, actually. And that's also very hard to put your finger on. You know, as we know, Rachel Bloom, like, wound up writing her own incredibly successful musical theater show. And that's being hinted at in this episode, is that she wants to rewrite things, and how exciting it is for her to watch somebody go on stage and sing the words that she's written out. For me, as you guys know, I struggled a lot because I wanted to perform and I knew that, but I didn't really understand what that meant or how it... I always struggled with the fact that I was supposed to be taking on a role of a character, and I just enjoyed being myself, and I enjoyed the spontaneity of conversation, and I didn't understand what that meant in terms of being a performer. The closest that I could come way back in the day was a talk show host, was something that I always thought I would probably be pretty good at this. And even that, I was like, it's a lot of small talk. You're dealing with people you don't know well. I didn't know what it meant because podcasts literally didn't exist. And even now, the way that I approach podcasting, it's just, you know, I do something that I think is a little bit more in depth than a lot do. So I came at it from a direction that I had to figure it out for myself. It wasn't something that I can be like, oh, look, I want to do that exact thing. And I could point to it and be like, there's an example, because that's exactly it, and follow in that person's footsteps. I had to cobble together my own whole thing. The closest that I got to, like, true inspiration that I basically drew from directly was Mark Reads and Mark Watches, which those of you who know who that is, you'll see the parallels with Unspoiled immediately. If you don't, I recommend him. Mark Oshiro is a writer who initially got his start. I think he was writing for BuzzFeed or Wired. I think it was BuzzFeed though. And he did these daily installments of reading Harry Potter for the first time, unspoiled. And it was like this article of his hot takes about what he had just read. And people gobbled it up. I didn't find him until he had gone way further. He had finished Harry Potter, I think, by the time I'd found him, and was in the midst of Twilight. And I really got sucked in when he started doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I remember, like, every day when I would leave work, I would refresh his site for when the article would go up to read on my way home during my commute. And I would devour them. I was so excited every time it went up. And then I was obsessed with Song of Ice and Fire, and it suddenly occurred to me, oh, I could do this for Song of Ice and Fire, but I don't really want to write something, and I really, really want Brendan to read them. And that was when I came up with the idea to do it as a podcast. And I'll never forget the day that it started. I suggested the idea to Brendan. He was like open to it and was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Maybe we could do that at some point. And I remember I was on the couch and I had been very relaxed, like throwing ideas out there, mentioned that he was like, you know, like I said, vaguely open. And then I like got this flicker, which will happen sometimes when I know in my gut, like, no, I need to do that. And I sat up and was like, we should do that. I'm serious. Like, we should do that. Would you be willing to like read the first chapter right now and we just record something and see what happens? And that was it. It was completely a spur of the moment kind of vague idea that came from somebody doing something that wasn't exactly the same. You know, Mark reads, Mark watches. It's him writing. It's only him. And yet it gave birth to this other thing that's a conversation that goes on for a couple hours sometimes. And it's just wild what technology allows to happen, because this would never have been an option. So it's very fun to sit back and watch Rebecca sort out the difference between what she thought was going to be the thing and what actually turns out to be the thing, because that is a really difficult place as an adult. We love being able to point our finger at something and be like, there it is, that's the answer. Especially when you're trying to make big changes in your life and you're trying to find something that sparks in you. It can be really discouraging if you think you found it and it turns out to not really be the thing. But Rebecca, the episode ends in such a way that it doesn't seem that she's discouraged. When she's talking to Greg and she says, my dream got stomped on, there isn't a sense of devastation. It's her sort of laughing about it while realizing, I guess that wasn't it, actually. And there's a hopeful feeling. It doesn't seem as if she's completely beaten down. It feels like she's stepping back and seeing the difference between how that went, what she expected, and that the fact that it didn't go the way she wanted is fine, because it wasn't what she thought it would be. So how could it? And I really appreciated that. Rowan says Mark started with Twilight before HP. Oh, really? I thought Harry Potter was the very first thing he ever did. Are you sure? I'm not sure that you're right about that, Rowan. Well, regardless, maybe you are right. Maybe I'm getting it totally backward. I thought that he started with Twilight on his own website, but that he started with HP on the website that he was working for at the time. And that was what sort of, like, Harry Potter was what sort of got him the following that went with him to his website so that he could continue independently. But anyway, okay. So I've just talked a lot about the general vibe of the show and the direction things go in. But let's start with what is actually going on here. So the title of the episode is I'm Finding My Bliss. And again, we have like the two parallel stories that both sort of fit the title, which is the Rebecca is finding her bliss, attempting to with musical theater, and Paula is finding out what she's worth and figuring out what firm she's going to work for. And what's going on with Paula? I'm going to talk about that just off the top. Paula's whole thing I really appreciate it because she is so uncompromising. There is never a moment where she's like, well, maybe I feel bad. She starts off when she's talking to Rebecca after showing her the two dresses she's choosing between for a job interview. Rebecca says something about how is Daryl coping with the fact that you're interviewing for other firms. And Paula says, oh, really badly. He's a fucking wreck. And immediately follows up with, but he'll be fine. And I really loved that. You know, it's something that I think those of us who have a little problem with maybe being codependent, we could use a lesson in that. Where we will see that somebody is not reacting well, and we feel it's our responsibility to fix that. We think that if they are upset, it's our job to make them not upset. It's not. we have to do what is right for us. And if somebody is upset, if it's due to something that we did to that person, that's different. But if somebody is upset due to a choice that we are making for ourselves that only tangentially affects them, then they are responsible for how they react to that. And Paula's being really balanced here with just being like, oh yeah, he's really upset. He's not doing well at all. But that is his responsibility. And that's pretty much how everything goes throughout the episode, is she keeps having these run-ins with Daryl, but she doesn't waver on the fact that she's going to do what's right for her. And he can either be supportive and understand that, or he can continue to dig his heels in against something that he doesn't have any control over. And that's the thing, right? If you... the Serenity Prayer, which is associated with AA, goes, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that has always struck me as so profound beyond it comes across as very trite and cliche because we've heard it so many times. But honestly, I feel that phrasing is the heart of how to live a happy life in a lot of ways. Granted, there are systemic things outside our control that we can't help but be affected by. Not trying to be like, oh, it's just your attitude and you can only have a bad day if you have a bad attitude. Like, no, I hate that shit. But there really is a freedom that comes from stopping and looking at the things that you have control over and realizing some of the things that you're acting like you have control over, you really don't. And your suffering is coming directly from the fact that you're attempting to control the uncontrollable. And that is part of Daryl's problem in a lot of episodes, is that he wants to have control over everyone around him. In a lot of ways, I don't want to say Daryl's controlling, but he's super resistant to change, and he has a fear of abandonment. So that causes him to try and hold on to stuff and people and situations and keep them from changing. And that makes him unhappy because things are inevitably going to change. That's just life. And if you keep fighting it, not only are you absolutely guaranteed to lose, but you're going to act like it's going to be freshly shocking every time because you're continuing to act as if you're brand new and had no idea that you didn't have control over how this thing was going to go. I really love that Paula is just, look, Daryl, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm doing it. And either you get supportive and you get on board with me, or you are going to be really sad. And I don't want you to be sad. But I also am not going to stay just because you want me to. That's not fair. I just loved it. I really appreciated it. So, and Daryl does, like, at one point, Paula is talking to him about looking at these official offers that she's getting, because as it turns out, she graduated top of the class and won awards. I don't remember if we heard about her winning awards. I am sure we did, and I've just forgotten, because there was a pretty long gap between episodes, like, in the middle of this season. But yeah, it turns out that she is in demand. And when he hears that it's like the issue of her wanting an official offer, first of all, he acts as if that's just a novel idea. His intention was simply to be like, we would like for you to stay, and not truly treat her as an employee that's got other options on the table. So that's the first thing that I was kind of like, all right, Daryl, the fact that you didn't even think to make an official offer, to me sounds like you aren't really taking Paula that seriously, which I would be offended by if I were her. And then secondly, what he decides to do in order to court her is take her out to this extremely fancy dinner that there's this scene that's so great about these waiters that he has ordered, like, what's the most expensive bottle of champagne on the menu? Or maybe just wine. I think it might just be wine. And they come out to see who ordered it because nobody ever has. And he's essentially treated like he's some sort of celebrity for this. So, Paula comes, and when she realizes what the wine is, she also knows. Like, she's always eyed it on the menu, wondering who the hell would spend that on a bottle of wine. And it's very revealing. And this is, like, I know that this isn't what Daryl meant, but honestly, it's such a good, like, microcosm. You guys gotta know what I'm talking about here. The whole, I'm going to spend a bunch outright to impress you, because I can't afford to long-term compensate you for what you're worth. I again, don't think that's Daryl's intention here. But I know that for me, as a employee, let's say in my 20s probably, early 20s, this sort of thing would probably have impressed me. Now, at my age, I would be like, yeah, very fancy wine, so expensive, all well and good, but what are you paying me ongoing? But I would probably have let myself be blinded by a big gesture like this from a company, you know, someplace that sends a car to pick you up for your interview, or brings you to someplace very exclusive for your interview over lunch, something like that. And I love that is his version of trying to woo her. And he also, like, wrote his offer on this scroll that gets delivered to their table on a platter. And he's like, I just wanted it to be something really fancy. This whole thing. She's just holding the scroll and says, okay, thank you. I will compare it with the others that will come via email, and puts it in her purse. I thought it was interesting that she doesn't open it at the table. And I'm assuming that's because she knows it's not really going to be an option for her, either because she assumes they aren't going to pay her what other places are offering. Although at this point, I don't think she's gotten an actual number from anyone yet. Or maybe it's just because he's going to expect her to make a decision on the spot if she does open it, and she knows that. So she's just like, I'm just not going to do it. But regardless, it does turn out that the place that gets in touch with her first is making a much higher offer than what Mountaintop is. And I don't think she's even accepting that one. She's just realizing that this is the ballpark she's playing in now. And she has to explain to Daryl that that kind of money would change everything. You know, and she'd be able to actually send her kid to college. They'd be able to pay off debt. And this is one of those things that for me is a real struggle, you guys, because I was talking about this with a friend of the show, Candace, the other day. I don't think Candace listens to this show. But those of you who commission these episodes run into her in the Spoil Me group because she's in charge of creating the events and stuff. And we were talking about what is enough, you know, like at what point does the income you are making feel adequate and like, okay, I can relax. I have it covered. I'm going to be okay. And the like sort of sense of unreality that comes when you were born in a family that had very little, and you watch people who are extremely wealthy continuing to want more, because you can sort of be like, why? Why do you want more? What exactly are you doing with that money? Like, you know, this is a real question. And so I know that for me, I can be very concerned about, like, what's charging too much per episode? What constitutes like an adequate income from Patreon where I feel like, okay, at this point, I'm going to feel like I should hire somebody to do some other things because I'll be making enough to afford that. And how difficult it is to really know where that line is, because you'll think you know, and then you'll remember, oh, I don't have health insurance. I guess I should factor that in. Or, oh, I don't have a car. So if I want to buy a car, and I have to pay for that, and I have to pay for insurance. So when you have less money, there's always another thing that you haven't really taken into account because you've gone without for so long that it isn't, in your mind, a total necessity. Excuse me, even though it kind of is, right? And it made me really happy, again, to see that Paula isn't qualifying the offer that she was made. She doesn't try and say, like, I don't need this much. I'm not worth this much. She's just excited. She's just, you know, interested in the number so that she has something to go with negotiations. Like, just good for you, girl, you know? It's difficult, especially as a woman, to be able to sit with, maybe I'm worth this. Maybe this is fine. I had to hide what I'm making on Patreon, not because I'm ashamed of it, but because I saw other people, especially some women on Patreon, whose communities began to talk some shit about how much the creators were making, and throwing out wild accusations and assumptions about how much those women's living expenses were, whether or not they were actually as broke as they claimed to be, and judging in general where the money was going and whether they deserved to be making as much as they were making. And I got so upset just watching that happen secondhand. That was what caused me to go and turn off mine. Because I got a tiny taste of that once, where I was going through some really bad financial difficulty, but I also had a purse that, like, the bottom broke out of it. So I posted some photos of various purses from AliExpress that were $14 each in different colors, and was like, which one should I get? And I found out that somebody had been messaging about how she can't be doing too bad. She's shopping for purses with this, like, attitude, like I was being really, like it was a Kate Spade or something, you know? Like, I felt like everything I do is scrutinized, and I don't want to have to justify everything. It's not fair. Other people aren't necessarily asked to do that. And I just really hope that Paula's able to keep the same energy, that whether people are upset, whether people are, you know, getting paid less, that's not any of her business. What she is concerned about is what's good for her, her family, her life, and her goals. And I really want to emulate her in that, you know, because it's very difficult sometimes to shut off the world and all of the judgments or assumptions that could be pouring in, and to keep yourself from, like, turning around and getting defensive when there's no reason to get defensive, because their opinion truly doesn't matter. So anyway, that ends, like I said, with Daryl realizing during a song Apple Man in the review that is so incredibly, it's so bad, and it's such a perfect send up of so many musical theater songs where you're genuinely like, I can't believe they wrote a whole song. I can't believe they did it. I can't believe how pointless and boring this song is. And it's a fucking classic. Yeah. So he comes to the understanding that he has to let her go and embrace change. And she also sort of gets to the heart of the matter when she talks to him and is like, we're not work friends, Daryl. We're friends, actual friends. If I'm not working here anymore, I'm still going to see you all the time. We are still going to spend time together. It's not like this is going to be the end of our relationship with each other. And I appreciated that because, of course, that's really what his fear is. And that's understandable. A lot of us have gone through that sort of thing where it's hard as an adult to meet people and make friends. So when a coworker leaves, it can feel like, wow, okay, I guess that friendship's over. And sometimes it is over. Sometimes you wind up staying in touch. It can be really fun to stay friends with somebody actually who's still working at the like shit show that you just left. So you'll get texts about like, you will not fucking believe what Courtney did in an email today. And you'll be like, bitch, what? I'm so glad I don't have to see Courtney anymore, but what happened? So anyway, yeah, that I really, really loved the whole direction that went. And also, I should mention that Daryl's gone to the review with the woman that he met at the hospital. So they are seeing each other, and that's delightful. So, okay, let's back up and go to Rebecca again. Rebecca goes to do this audition. Like I said, she is very enthusiastic, not an amazing singer, but she still gets assigned this song. And I didn't realize at first that it was I didn't remember like the meaning of the word review, that it's a series of songs that are individual and not necessarily a story and a narrative tying them together. So when people went and looked at the list and they saw what song they'd been assigned, I was like, wait, what? Not what character? And then I realized what was going on. And she goes to audition with Valencia, because Valencia is upset. She thought her girlfriend was going to propose to her and got herself very psyched up. And then she did not propose. Valencia has a habit of doing this. And she throws a bit of a tantrum, as Rebecca calls it, and tells her girlfriend, I'm not going back because I'm performing in this play, and goes and auditions with Rebecca and gets assigned The Pirate King's Bride as her song. I have to assume, again, I really want to remind people that despite having been into musical theater in my way, I am unfamiliar with a lot of pretty famous shows. So I don't know if Apple Man is a direct spoof. I don't know if the Pirate's Bride, if that's a direct spoof. I'm trying to remember the name of Rebecca's song. I have to figure that hers is like Best Little Whorehouse in Texas or whatever it's called. I feel like it must be a spoof of that, but maybe not. I never saw it. Again, I'm just sort of like throwing out ideas. But Valencia performs this song, which is truly horrifying, about basically being raped by somebody, having Stockholm syndrome, adoring him despite the fact that he beats her, and admitting that she must like it or else she would have left by now. Like, it's full of just horrific abuse dressed up as romance, and it's really something. And again, these songs exist. It sounds extreme And of course they put it together in such a way that it's all these terrible ideas back to back. But there are a lot of songs out there that when you read the lyrics, you're just like, oh my God, this is like a YouTube comments section. What the fuck? So her girlfriend comes backstage and Valencia kind of freaks out and leaves her there, stalks off, because it's very clear that her girlfriend is not reading her mind, basically. And eventually she meets with the girlfriend, and I'm sorry guys, I'm not remembering her girlfriend's name. I feel like it was... Fuck. I was going to say, I feel like it started with an R, but I don't remember. They meet at, I think, that same wine bar, and Valencia basically tells her that she's not going back to Bath. Thank you, Rowan. Valencia's like, I'm not going back to New York with you unless you propose. She says, essentially, she wants to be married. All of her friends are married. This is always interesting to me because whenever somebody says, I want to get married and be married, I really am interested in why. And I say that with no judgment. I'm getting married for the second time. Like, for me, wanting to get married is wanting to declare to people that I'm bonded with this person and that we are a unit in a lot of ways. And also, I want to have the party. Of course. Of course, that's a factor for me. But whenever somebody says, all my friends are married, that's always the one that sort of stops me in my tracks, because I couldn't give any fewer fucks what people around me are doing. But I know I am not necessarily in the majority on that. A lot of people have a sort of like series of finish lines that they picture in their head, and they judge their own success based on whether they've hit certain markers before or at the same time as the friends around them have hit them. I think my theory on this is the reason why it has never been something that bothered me. I think it's because I've never had a long-term consistent group of friends from high school onward to judge myself against. I have come and gone from different communities of people, and I've never really stayed in touch with any group long enough to watch them all, one by one, get into relationships, move in with each other, get married, have kids. So I think that's really where I come from, is that I have never been in the sort of situation where I've never been witnessing that with a group of people that I've otherwise been riding on the same train track with the whole time. I can understand when I step back and look at it. Okay, if we were in middle school and high school and we all graduated high school together and we all went to college and we all graduated college at the same time, I guess I could see how you've hit a bunch of milestones together and now you've gone into this sort of no man's land where who knows when or if you will hit them. I could see that being a lot more upsetting, I guess. But it's just, for me personally, it isn't my experience. So I'm always surprised when people have this as a concern, you know? It's just, especially having kids too. Because for me, I only know out of the 10 people I know who have had children, only 2 of them meant to. So for me, a lot of times having kids, people act like that's an accomplishment. And for me, it's often been an indication that somebody fucked up. That's just my 2 cents. So anyway, she gives her this ultimatum and the episode ends there. And I have no idea what Beth's going to think. I kind of feel like getting married on an ultimatum is a real bad way to start things off. I wouldn't want to be proposed to because they knew I was leaving them otherwise. That for me wouldn't be anything. I wouldn't feel confident in that. So, I don't know. So that's the whole thing with Valencia. Rebecca gets this song about basically being a madam who is just looking for true love. And she tells the general plot of the song to Nathaniel, who walked in and just got basically assigned the part of the prince, which Tim from Mountaintop was a shoo-in for, and he is very resentful when he gets relegated to Apple Man, which I understand, because Apple Man is so terrible. And Nathaniel says something like, sounds a little old-fashioned, when Rebecca explains it, and she's like, no, it's a classic. And I'm like, okay. I mean, not mutually exclusive, Rebecca, but... And indeed, she comes to find that out. She begins to sing the song, she begins to read the lyrics at home, and starts to get a little agitated. And we eventually see her perform the song. And she does her best with it. She's very enthusiastic with it. But you can see this sort of concern with every passing line. Because it's all about a woman being used up and shameful because she had sex with multiple partners. And how no man would want her. But if they do, maybe she'll finally be worth something. And it's just awful. So she sits down. And she revises the lyrics to be more updated and modern and less problematic and horrifying. And she sings it, and her director, who is... I don't know if the woman playing the director is somebody I should know, but God, is she every fucking director. I swear to God. These stereotypes exist for a reason. So... She hates it. The director fucking hates Rebecca's version. And essentially, her whole thing is, who the fuck do you think you are? This is a timeless classic, and you're out here trying to act like you can do better than this? Are you kidding? Which is indeed the attitude of a lot of people out there in the theater community and in the audiences. They don't want you tinker and tamper with something that they know by heart and that means a lot to them personally, even if what it means to them personally it doesn't actually gel with what the lyrics really say. And Rebecca is backstage on the day of the performance, and she's really struggling with what to do because she doesn't want to go out there and sing this fucking horrifying song. So Nathaniel suggests that she go out there and sing her version anyway, but she doesn't want to upset the director. So Nathaniel decides that he is going to skip his song, and he goes out there and begins to sing Rebecca's version of her song in a moment of sort of throwing himself to the wolves that is very touching to her. And they have a bit of a moment. And it's sort of funny because he is as gun shy about it as she is. She's the first one to sort of pull back. But he doesn't seem like he regrets it. It seems more like this wasn't meant to go this way immediately. He didn't do this, it doesn't feel like, just to get her admiration. It feels like it was a bit more sincere than that, which is nice, you know? And in the wings, Josh is watching. Because the whole episode, I mean, there's this great, bit where Greg is justifying to Heather why he's doing his thesis all the way in California. She's like, it's obviously so you can be near Rebecca. And he's like, what? No. She's like, mm-hmm. And then Nathaniel is meeting with one of the felons and talking to her, and she calls out that he's obviously here so that he can have a case to discuss with Rebecca. And he says, what? No. She's like, mm-hmm. And then later, Josh is on the phone volunteering to be on the tech crew for the community theater review. And Estrella from her tank starts making some comments about that he's just doing this to be near Rebecca. So yeah, Josh watches all of this, and he is really unhappy with the closeness that he's seeing between Rebecca and Nathaniel, even though it doesn't actually go anywhere. And I thought it was sort of interesting because she gets a moment with Nathaniel and she gets a moment with Greg, but she doesn't really get one with Josh this episode. The moment that she has with Greg, so he's doing his thesis, like I said, and opening this business, doing a soft open of his father's place. And he has this scene with Heather where he asserts that the restaurant failed because West Covina turned its back on it, which is a wild assumption. Like, that's some right-wing shit, Greg. That's the sort of thing that they'll be talking about, how, like, oh, well, cancel culture killed my business. Nobody wanted to come here after they saw me post highly problematic shit on my Facebook. Like, people just don't like you and want to not spend their money there. That's the free market that you're allegedly so fucking invested in. But sure. And she has to point out, hey, that wasn't what happened. Your dad drank too much, was really bad at, like, handling money and businesses, and so it wasn't great to come to, and people didn't want to spend their money here. That's what actually happened. And Greg is sort of taken aback by that. He clearly didn't see it clearly until she just spells it out for him. And he gets more invested in it than he expected to. The night of the review, they're waiting for people and he's freaking out because there's nobody there. But then once the doors open, folks come streaming in and he's very busy. And he's talking to Heather at the end of the night and is like, wow, that went really well, actually. And it becomes clear that this is what he wants. He is as surprised as anybody, but yeah, maybe he can make this work. And he does a reprise of the song, like, what's the name of the song, guys? Feel like it's What Do You Have? What'll It Be, West Covina? Is that the name of it? It's weird too, because obviously it's a different actor playing Greg and doing the reprise. But, man, he really has quite a voice. I don't love this Greg. I really miss the other actor. But when he begins to play and sing, I was just like, good God, you know? And Rebecca comes to see him. She isn't able to make it to the actual soft open, but she comes to check the place out. And he's closed at the time, but when she comes in, she's just super impressed. And he admits to her that he did his thesis here in part because he wanted to be near her. And that, plus Nathaniel confessing that he joined the review to be near to Rebecca, both times she's sort of surprised by it. And I think that's another indication how far she's come. Old Rebecca would have been obsessing over their motivations for everything they did, and would have been like painting herself as the center of the universe. And of course they're doing this because they want to be near me. New Rebecca is actually focused on herself and what she's doing enough that that kind of thought isn't even on her mind. Once they tell her, she's kind of like, oh. And it's not like she's arguing with them over it or anything, or saying, that doesn't make sense. What? Why? It's just, she has had other shit on her mind. She's had her own stuff to do. And that's so refreshing also. You know, it's really a sign of growth. Because, let me tell you, obsessing over why other people are doing the shit they do, talk about it like a no-win. You'll never know if you're right or wrong. Nothing will ever quite validate you enough. And you will neglect all of your own shit while you obsess over this other thing. So it's just really, really nice to see her actually throwing herself into something that means a lot to her in a way that turns into like forward movement for her character that doesn't involve any of them. And Greg goes to get the, like, lasagna that he wants her to sample. And while she's waiting for him, she sings that, "Oh, can someone lasso me a husband," under her breath. But then she stops and thinks about her and Nathaniel, and she just says, "Damn it." And that is where the episode ends. Which, again, progress. She didn't actually kiss Nathaniel this time. She didn't actually kiss or make promises to Greg this time. So, yes, a little damn it, because she wants to, like, not be involved with any of them. But, you know, give yourself a little space, lady. You're not made of stone. It's okay, you know? So, overall, I really liked this episode. It was just, like, I don't know, it was really fun, and I've said before how, unless Rebecca is sort of, like, spinning wildly out of control, the episodes feel like they're not as entertaining, but I feel like they've really tapped into other ways of making things hilarious without having to rely on her being, like, not okay. And these musical theater spoof songs were really very good. And Tim is a gem. He really is. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys again so much for listening. Thank you to Rowan for feeding me Beth's name. And thank you, Megan, for commissioning the episode. And I will be seeing you guys soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.